Yeah, what I would say is that these are all pointers to something, and they might be useful or not depending the context, the person. And so in the beginning of the meditation, I said many words, meaning this it has been called many by many names. So beingness, consciousness, I amness, awareness. But they point to one side of things. Things is not even the right word, because when you said, how could this be nothing? And I'm thinking you're referring to some kind of pointer about this being nothing. Yeah, and so think of when you're contemplating that nothingness, that pointer, which seems like it's active in you, notice the grasping nature of mind, which, if you don't look very closely, it will stop being known as mind and it will be known as I. It'll be known as that activity in the center that is making an object. It's simultaneously grabbing an object as it's making an object.
Mm.
And because there are no objects, it has to constantly be making them. And so when I say there are no objects, I'm not talking about the level of our experience of matter. So there's a computer, that's an object. In the experience of consciousness or awareness, there are no objects. So experientially, even if you contemplate an object and you touch it, the true experience of that is there is no boundaries anywhere. All you're experiencing is one field of sight where the mind can draw an outline, but it's one field of visual perception and one field of sensation, which right now there is, if I close my eyes, I can still identify three. By closing my eyes, I mean if I'm not looking, because if I look, I know, and I know there's three fingers very quickly. But with eyes closed, let's say I don't have the information of sight and I have to guess. Yes, I can play around with my hand. I'm still using the experiment of imagine there's no memory. I close my eyes. I can still make out five fingers. But it takes a bit of playing. I have to move them. And so what I'm going at is even the sensation of the fingers holding the supposed object, the sensation of that is a very constantly moving tingling with a very vague area or without any boundary, where there are three, because of three places of sensation. There's actually five because these two are touching my hand, and so three are colder and two are warmer. And that's all I know about this supposed object, plus the side of it. And but the side of it, it requires thought to make out a separation. And if we got really scientific, it's exactly what science knows. There are absolutely no boundaries. In fact, this is all empty, all of it. Everything we're experiencing. The physical object as well is completely 100% empty. And so what, without going too much into the science of it, the experiential reality is that there are no objects. Why are they objects? That's a teaching, is to refer to the objects of consciousness. But I'm that's a way in which a teaching can go, where you refer to the objects of consciousness. But now let's dive deeper into the concept of an object. And that's where I'm saying, what is an object? An object is something that's independent, it's separate. It has a boundary, that's a real boundary. Even this cup, the boundary, if you look at the atomic level, there's no boundary. Go back to the sensation of your fingers. Where is the object? Touch two fingers like this. That's what we're calling sensation. We agree to refer to that as sensation. But the sensation itself, if you were to try to really investigate it, like you put it in the magnifying glass of your attention, and it's a very blurry, strange thing. It's not very there. It doesn't have a clear boundary. You have to rub your fingers quite a bit to create a sense of a boundary there. If you're just touching gently, it's a very vague. In fact, it's if you do this, there's not two sensations. There's only one. Mm-hmm. Where there is contact. When you start to see, what I'm getting at is you're because of probably this teaching of the objects of consciousness, you need to look at that differently and see where are the objects, and see the aspect of there are no objects. What appears is one field of varying qualities. Mm. So qualities like sight, sound, touch, but they're all in the same field of awareness. Those have been called the objects of consciousness. But an object is practical until you start conceiving them as true objects, and they're not. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the nothingness is, because it's no thing. Mm. It's like in the metaphor of an ocean and a wave. The wave isn't a thing. It's the way in which the water is moving that appears to be a thing you can separate and conceptualize. And so concepts make things into objects. But the concept itself is an image, it's a sound. again, without any boundaries. The concept of a point or a circle or a line, it's not a thing. It's an image. It's an image in a space. There's no boundaries to the boundary in the sense of a line. If I imagine a space and I divide it with a line on a paper, for example, there is no real boundary there. We can, at the level of the page, conceptualize a separation,
Mm-hmm.
which is useful. But that's why there's two sides to it. And what I think you're contemplating is what in Buddhism would be called shunyata, which is emptiness. And so the sensation is form. So consider it more like form instead of objects of consciousness, the forms of consciousness. And so now form, yes, there is form, but it's not separate from anything in any way. You cannot find a true separation here in any way. You can then say, okay, between air and ceramic, there's a separation. But if we look at the experiential nature of this, you cannot find a separation. So there's form. Now those forms, if you contemplate the nature of it, it's also empty. And it will appear like a leap. Because it's both at the same time. And so in Hinduism they say Nama Rupa Satchitananda, and Satchitananda is a trinity. It's three, and it's three aspects of reality. But it's preceded by Nama Rupa. And Nama Rupa is name, form, the naming of forms. And so you actually have five aspects, but one is within the boundary of mind and thought, and the other is not. The other contains thought and goes beyond thought, which is Satchitananda. And so what I've been talking about beingness is starting to move from Nama Rupa to Satchitananda. Satchitananda you could translate as beingness, consciousness, bliss, knowingness. There's all these words, but it has to do with there is something that is, it's not a thing. There is a knowing and there is peace. And then the mind isolates forms and gives names. And in that naming forms, Nama Rupa, there is an obscuring of Satchitananda. There is a forgetting. Because all the focus goes into Nama Rupa. But all of it, Nama Rupa Satchitananda, is empty. There is no things, even thoughts, even concept, even sensations don't have things. No,
being.
because the what you are calling objects, it only exists at the level of rupa, which is forms, and the nama makes it objects. That's what I'm saying. It's not a leap. It's just looking more closely. Yeah, because when you said, okay, in Satchitananda there are objects. Well, but the word something, that's where it's flawed, because it's not a thing. There is isness there, and that's why it's so hard to name that. Think of it as a contemplation, because the more you engage thought, the more it's going to get obscured. You have to contemplate, and by contemplate, I mean look closely with your awareness at your experience right now as it is, and notice everything that's coming from memory, because you need memory to start creating forms and naming. And so I'm not prescribing for us to live without memory, but to be able to know reality not filtered through memory, not filtered through namarupa.
Mm-hmm.
We have lost that ability. That's what we were born. That's how we were born. And Jesus said, to enter the kingdom, you shall be as children. To go back, to be able to know experience through the without the filter of naming, without the filter of the knowing of the mind. To have the possibility of experiencing directly without. And by without, it doesn't mean thought disappears. It just means you know it's thought, and it can be in some way, it's like it's put aside. But what actually, a better way to describe it is that it's seen through. It's seen through. Instead of focusing on the layer of thought, we see through it. And I'm using metaphors, right? But seeing through that veil of thought, the experience of reality is Satchitananda. It's empty, it's full, it's alive, it's beingness, it's peaceful. But all those qualities can be refined once we are able to have the more raw, direct experience of it. And what you're asking about is really important. And do very simple contemplation, like where is that? How is it possible that that's empty? What is because the word empty is pointing to something, and it's pointing to experience you're having. So you are, and you are experiencing emptiness constantly. You never have not. But it gets veiled and interpreted as things. And so it's not about discovering something that wasn't there and now you perceive it. It's about clarifying the true nature of consciousness, awareness, perception. And it's the direction is mystery, because when you experience objects, there is, prior to that, an intellectual, a mental knowing of what a thing is for it to be an object. And that narrows down mystery and makes something known, versus making something interpreted. And by that I mean we know we're approximating things with thought in order to function, to live, to relate, to communicate, to play. The other key is that the attachment to not seeing this has to do with I. It's in service to the knowing of what I am. And the knowing, I mean the false knowing. Because emptiness that I'm talking about applies to I as well. And that's something we just are very attached to not seeing. It's the core of all spiritual teachings. Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity. It's more clear and direct in Buddhism and Hinduism. Some aspects of Hinduism. So as you start to see that there are no things, the I that grasps to be a thing starts to lose its bottom. It starts to lose the ability to hold on to anything, to attach to anything. It's only difficult for the mind, and it's difficult because there is a deep desire to be something, to know what I am. And it's a beautiful desire. It's a beautiful journey. But at some point, something lives its journey. It gets, in a sense, tired of that. and starts to want to let go, starts to want to surrender, starts to want to go back to the source. To be free. But it's definitely not something to rush. It can get very intense if rushed. The Tao called Tao is not Tao. More commonly known as the Tao that is named is not the true Tao. And so the Tao called Tao is not Tao. So when you refer to reality as the objects of consciousness, consciousness and the objects of consciousness, that's the naming of Tao, which is not Tao. But as you said, it could be useful. A teaching can be useful. It applies to everything I'm saying. Yeah.